Thanks, Matt. And welcome, as Matt already said, welcome on Family Sunday. Real quick, before we dive in here to Psalms, I just want to talk to that just for a second. Here's one of the reasons we do Family Sundays, which we do them the fourth Sunday of every month. And there's a couple of different reasons. Number one, as just for our own, being a small church plant with ministry teams, specifically our GLC kids team, this gives them, it not only gives them a break, but it gives them an opportunity to be a part of the body, gives them an opportunity to grow in their faith and hear the word preached. And so it also extends our teams a little bit more. Burnout's real, no matter what you're doing, right? So we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to just speak life into them in that regard and give them opportunities to rest. But just as important, also, we value your family. And we think it's really important for kids to get connected to church well before they leave kids ministry, right? This is one of the things we see in churches. You see often, what happened is a kid goes to church, they go to the programs they're a part of. I did this too. That doesn't mean those programs are wrong or anything, but eventually when those programs end, now what, right? So it's our hope that they become part of Gospel Life Church even as little kids, that they see themselves as part of our church. And then also it's important, we want to press in on the idea that you as parent, so if you're a parent here this morning, you as parent, hey, you're the main discipler for your kids. And so one of the cool things we're doing with Family Sundays is there's a link to our YouTube page that you can go to, and we have the 4 Sundays lesson. So they're going through what's called the bridge this month, right? And so you can actually, this week, it's all set up for you. You're going to get the end of the service. There's a little parent cue you'll get, okay? And then there's a video you can watch. The video's about 13 to 14 minutes, something like that. And it includes a lesson, and then you can have an opportunity to discuss with your kids, because at the end of the day, that's important as well. And if you're here and you don't have kids, let me encourage you to pray for these kids. As you see them here on Sundays, make that a matter of prayer. As you pray for the kids of Gospel Life Church, we want to see them grow in their faith as they're the next generation. So that's really important to us. I just wanted to put that out there for you. We don't talk about that all the time as much as we ought to, and so I just want to make that very clear. And but we're so glad to have you guys with us today, you kiddos, and looking forward to spending what is going to be a good day in probably the most important psalm. Right, so Psalms, these are prayers, these are songs, these are poems, however you want to. This is a poetry type book that's full of real life people encountering real life situations who are encountering a real life God, and just that whole combination. So sometimes we're going to, today, it's going to be a really peaceful, kind of a fun psalm, in a sense that Psalms 23 is full of hope. And then sometimes there's going to be these psalms that have just a little hint of hope and a ton of lament, right? And so it's just going to be kind of this back and forth no matter where you go. But what you'll find in the Psalms is you'll find people going through real life stuff. And it's not always quite equatable. Like when you hear David be like, put the burning coals of hell on their head of my enemies. I don't ever talk about people that way, right? But translating that through is sometimes tough. But the reality is just seeing God, real people, man, having these emotions that are genuine, and how they interact with them in a way that points them to the gospel. And that's what we want to do. And so one of the cool things is with the Psalm series, let me encourage you, invite your friends to this, okay? And one of the cool things we've done this time, I don't know if this is I think it's pretty cool. All right, this is actually a postcard that you can send. You know how when you go on a vacation, you send maybe you do this, maybe you don't. Maybe you just send a picture. Either way, you send something to a friend and you say, hey, I wish you were here. Look at all the fun we're having. And so this is actually a postcard that you can send. It's already pre-addressed. If you don't have the money, I'll give you money for stamps, okay? But you can send this to a friend and say, hey, this is something we're learning, and I just want to invite you to be a part of this. So just a little way you can do that. And you can hand it to them however you want, but there's a place for you to write a note as well. And of course, it has some information about where we're at. So anyways, feel free to grab those. There's some there by the offering plate. There's some out front. And so feel free to grab one of those throughout this entire series as we go through it, okay? So let's jump in here to Psalm chapter 23. Now, if you read this psalm here from the very beginning, it almost seems like David is insulting himself and insulting us, right? As we kind of try to take this psalm and make it for us, right? Because he calls the Lord the shepherd, so that would mean him the sheep, right? Have you ever spent any time with sheep? Have you ever spent some time with sheep? Have you ever spent some time with sheep? And there's a pretty common idea that sheep are dumb, right? Like it's kind of the thought. Now, if you spent time with sheep, you know that's not entirely true, okay? But sheep do dumb things, right? But they are actually pretty intelligent, specifically in their social skills. Did you know that sheep can identify like 58 different faces? How crazy is that? That's nuts. But they're just able to do that. And that's when we hear Jesus say, my sheep hear my voice. They can identify, right? That's important to them. They're very social, so they will defend their family, right? They'll support one another. If they're not in their family, they kind of flip out. They lose it. And so there's one guy I was reading, he talked about this one sheep. It was away from its flock, and it was going in circles, and it wouldn't eat because they didn't know what to do, right? So they need that social interaction. But to be frank with you a little bit, sheep may not be dumb, but they're a bit airheadish, okay? They're a bit of an airhead, all right? That's just kind of the way they are. And you can kind of see, here's a couple of pictures for you. It's Family Sunday, so I thought I'd show the kids these ridiculous, look at this. And that one almost looks like a camel, doesn't it? But it's a sheep, I promise. Watch out, I don't think they spit like camels, but sheep can kind of have this mentality. So I have a couple of questions for you. This is really for the kids. Adults, I know you want to be right here, okay? But kids, let me ask you a question. You can respond. This is somewhere where you can respond to me. Okay, here's a question. What do shepherds do for the sheep? Like, what are some things that they do for the sheep? They take care of them. Okay, how do they, okay, not you, Caleb, but other kids, how do they take care of them? And you can whisper it to your dad, and he can tell you if you're nervous to say it out loud. How do they take care of the sheep? Any kids want to answer? Or those who think they're kids? Or some different ways they do that? They feed them, right? They bring them to the pastures. They guide them. That's a great answer from that really cute girl in the front. Right? They do. They guide them along, right? All right. Well, maybe do they protect them? They do, don't they, right? Like, what are some things they would protect them from? What animals might want to eat a delicious looking sheep besides humans? Yes. Anybody want to chime in there? Do they howl a little bit? Ow, right? Yeah, wolves, right? Wolves, they want to eat sheep. Maybe coyotes, maybe, right? I don't know if a bear would, but according to David, like he had lions coming in there trying to eat them. So, there's different kinds of animals. Okay, here's another one. But before we do, let's look at the cuteness of sheep. Aren't they so cute? Oh, bless them. I mean, look how cute that one up there with the little, that must be somebody's pet. Which eventually means that'll be their dinner. Okay, right? But he does look delicious, doesn't he? Be good on with some pita bread, and I'm kidding. That's too bad. Okay, too far. Okay, so why would a sheep want to listen to a shepherd? Like, what would be some reasons we would listen to a shepherd? And adults can answer this too. It doesn't have to just be kids. Why would the sheep want to listen to a shepherd? They trust them. That's a good answer. Cute girl in the front. She's really cute. Looks just like her mama. Right? Yeah, they're trustworthy, right? They protect them. This is kind of the same reasons why. That's what the shepherd does for them. That's why they should trust them, because they know best. Right? And I'm going to show you a video here in a little while. Not now, but in just a minute, we'll show you why a sheep needs to trust a shepherd. It's very short, all right? But reality is, when it comes to sheep, right, they may not be dumb, but they do some dumb things, and they don't know exactly how to take. So that's why the shepherd is vitally important to them, their survival, okay? And so as we look at this, and let's look at the first couple verses here. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores," or I won't go any further than that yet. So as we read those first two verses there, here what we're seeing is he says, I shall not want. Here's what that means. That doesn't mean, when he talks about wanting things, I think about the things that I want in my life. There are things that I want that I probably shouldn't want, right? There are things that I want that I maybe don't need. And then there's things that I want that every person, it's kind of true for it's normative for every human being, right? Like there's certain things that are wants there. And so the idea is that I shall not want doesn't mean that I'm going to get the things I don't need, or doesn't mean the things that I shouldn't want. It's actually more to the point, the things that I need, that God has said, hey, this is what you need in your life. So things like relationships, things like satisfaction, things like happiness and joy, just to name a couple of them. That in Christ, in Jesus, although I know this isn't necessarily talking about Jesus as a whole, it's definitely parallel to what Jesus talks about in John 10. So there's this connection between what I shall not want, that I'll have everything I could ever need as a human being. Everything that I need to be the person that God has created me to be, I find in my shepherd. And so when we think about this in terms of that, we all follow shepherds in our life, don't we? I think about, there are people that I followed in my life. I mean, there are some things that my friends did that I wish I could go back and change. You feel that this morning? Right? And to the kids, I'll tell you, your friends, can I tell you something about your friends? They're probably really nice. They're probably really sweet, but they're not as smart as your parents. I'm just going to tell you that right now, okay? All right? So here's the reality. I'm not saying you should never listen to your friends, but if your friends disagree with your parents, more than likely they're wrong, okay? I'll just tell you that up front. And that's true for any of us, though. When we think through this idea that there are shepherds that we want to follow, there are things in our life which, when we follow after them, they lead us to our own destruction. So those shepherds can be like desires, certain desires that we might want. The shepherds can be things like thoughts that we have. Shepherds can be actions that we do, places we go, things that we consume. They can be people we listen to. Maybe even pastors could be a shepherd, right? They definitely called that. Doesn't mean they're always good, though, right? But it could be a pastor, it could be a guru, it could be a religious leader, it could be a professor, a teacher. I mean, even your parents, although God has given them to you as little kids, they're not always right. So the reality is we all follow shepherds, but some shepherds that we follow, when we follow them, they will lead us to paths of destruction. Which leads us to really the first idea this morning, which is this. Shepherds abound in the world. Everywhere you look, you can find a shepherd. People telling you, come get this. Have you ever watched commercial just for a second? And I don't watch many commercials anymore, right? But I've watched them with my kids, and you know what my kids want? Everything that they're sold on TV, right? They're like, oh, Dad, we need that. We have to have that. We need that pillow for our necks that we can get for $3 or 3 purchases of $10.99. We need that little pillow because it looks really comfortable, and we go on the plane all the time, right? Or, hey, Dad, we need, and they have these things. We get these magazines sometimes to our house, we get a Target thing. For whatever reason, every ad they send us seems to match up with things that we're talking about. It's weird. It's almost like they're listening, right? And it's crazy, but the kids will peruse through those magazines, and they'll point to every page. There's something on there that they want, right? Because those things, they know how to sell stuff, right? There are shepherds abound in this world, and everyone's vying for your attention. All these shepherds are vying for you to follow them, trust them, follow them, but only one shepherd is good. That's what David's saying here. He's saying, yes, there are plenty of places, people you can follow, things, ideas, philosophies you can follow, but only one shepherd is actually good. Which leads us to this idea that only Jesus will lead you to genuine peace, to genuine security, happiness, rest, and righteousness. Look at verse 2. He leads me beside still waters. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Verse 3, he restores my soul. The rest of verse 3, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. There seems to be this element where Jesus is leading us down a pathway which will actually lead you to genuine peace. When I think about peace, it's interesting when I genuinely consider, what would peace be for me? Is it a quiet household? Is that what peace is for me? Is it my kids not fighting? Maybe that's peace. Maybe peace is, me and my wife not fighting. Maybe my boss being happy with me and not getting on to me again, right? Maybe it's peace looks like what we want to see. I'm sick and tired of seeing on the news all the disruptions and all the injustice and all that. We want genuine peace. Maybe that's peace for you. Maybe peace would be, we can go on and on with that, can't we? What about security? Think about this, all of a sudden you have something happen where you got to dip into your savings a little bit and you start to freak out because, oh no. I may not be able to have this amount of money if something else comes along, right? And so we kind of freak out. And it's not to say that you should be dumb with your money, but it is to say that you should, and some of you are going, savings? What's savings? I don't want you to be dumb with your money, but at the same time, understand your money is not where you find your hope, and you won't find security in money because there are going to be things come your way which are going to take that away from you. If that's your God, if that's where you're putting your hope in, guess what? If God's really pursuing you, he's going to rip that from you. Just whatever it is. And that can definitely, and I can harp on finances, but maybe it's just, I want my kids to feel safe. And now with the way the world's going, I mean, look at the world. Can I really feel like they're safe? Do I even want to bring another child into this world with the way the world is? Like, we have these thoughts and we want things to feel safe and secure. Of course, happiness, there are plenty of things there. There's rest and there's maybe even righteousness. And we look for these things that we think will actually bring us these things. But what happens is they might bring a little bit of it, but eventually they will leave us wanting. We'll talk about that here in a second. With that in mind, let's jump over to John chapter 10 just for a second, okay? John chapter 10. John chapter 10. And in our Bibles here, it'd be page 523, okay? So 523 in the blue Bibles here. But John chapter 10, let's look at verse 10, starting at verse 10. This is what he says. This is Jesus, and this is John. He's talking about, these are the great I ams. So one of the great I ams. He talks about all different things. I am the bread of life. And here he's going to talk about how he is the good shepherd. Look at verse 10. So he's talking about the idea that there are some shepherds who will do this, and you are the sheep, and I'm the doorway to the fold. I'm the doorway for the sheep. And look at verse 10. He says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that the sheep may have life and have it abundantly. For I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming, and he leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to me and my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. He's talking about the future of the church right there. Verse 18, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I received from my Father. So we see this element of, when David calls the Lord his shepherd, we see Jesus is really assuming that role here for us. And he's saying, that shepherd David talked about, and I don't know that necessarily Jesus had this specific psalm in mind, but maybe he did. But here he's saying, I'm the good shepherd. You have all these other shepherds out there, but listen to me. And for them, it wasn't just ideologies and their own thoughts. It was also this religion that was taking place in their society. They had all these religious leaders who were all about themselves, and where it brought them, there was plenty of religion taking place. There was plenty of sacred things that they were doing. There were plenty of rituals they were accomplishing, but they were not earning God's favor because their favor could never be earned in that manner. Their favor had to be earned in a different way, and it was only ever to be earned through the good shepherd laying his life down for the sheep. So let's go to our second thought this morning, and it's this, that in his goodness. So in his goodness, Jesus is the path to God. Look at verse 3. For he leads me, this good shepherd, he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Right? There was something that God decided to do. Ephesians chapter 1 tells us it was before the foundation of the world. He had this plan. And this plan included our redemption, which is insane to even think about. But a shepherd they need to think through things, right? They need to think about they need to know where the best places are to go to feed their sheep. They need to know where the enemies are and to identify where they are. They need to know what the best paths are. Like, they have a plan, right? They're not idiots. They have a plan because they care about their flock. And God cared about his creation so much that he came into time and space And he stoops down and becomes like us. And in his compassion, he lays down his life for us. So in goodness, the path to God is Jesus coming to restore God's good name. And not that his name ever lost any of its fame, but that in his redemption of God's people, that it's for the sake of God's name. It's for his name's sake. It's because God cares about his glory, and thereby we're benefits of that Jesus came to the earth to die for us. So I want to show you just a second there on Nathaniel, just for a second. But this video is just a little clip. You probably saw it on Facebook this week. That's where I saw it. All right, but this is just a little clip of it's interesting to see the sheep, how, here's the shepherd. We don't know exactly what he's saying because there's no volume, but he pulls this thing out and we see the sheep doing its own thing, and this is where it leads it. Right? But of course, as we're going to learn about Jesus, he leads us down a path that isn't going to lead to our destruction. But look at this little sheep. It's really cute. Anybody else see that? You probably did, right? Isn't that so us, right? Like that's so me. It's exactly, oh yeah, okay, Jess, I got you. Boop, 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 boom, right back into the hole again, right? That's just us, all right? And I love that video. But here's the reality is we think we know. I had this conversation with one of my children this morning. Actually, both of them, I think, on some different levels. And I'm like, you are, this year, you're this old. I'm 38. Okay? I know better than you do. I just want you to know this. This doesn't mean that you don't have any good opinions, but please trust me. Navy blue and black don't go together. Okay? They just don't. Please trust me. You can't eat candy for breakfast, right? Like I have knowledge that works, right? And that's just exactly the way it is, though. We think we know. And we get out of one hole, just go back to another hole, right? That's just the way, that's the way it happens for us. So kind of thinking through this idea again of these shepherds. So there are some shepherds, some philosophies, some ideologies, some ways of doing life that will lead us toward trying to save ourselves, right? This is where religion takes you. Like we want to be really honest about this. Religion takes you down a pathway where you think, if I'm just this good, or if I'm not this bad, then somehow, then I'm going to make God love me. That's what religion says. And that can be played out. Maybe your religion isn't God. Maybe it's your family. If I don't yell at my kids and I let them do whatever they want, then my kids are going to love me. I don't know if that's going to work. But maybe you have that mentality. Maybe it's if I just do these nice things for my wife and I keep trying and tell her all these things, that she's not going to leave me. And so that's maybe your, and we can play that game however we want. But reality is we continue to try. We continue to strive, thinking it's on our shoulders to accomplish things. When it comes to your relationship with God, that's what religion will tell you, that it's on your shoulders. It's the choices you make. It's the things you choose to do and the things you choose not to do. And if you have the right combination of that, then you actually will get to go to heaven. You'll get to go to the afterlife. You'll get to go whatever that religion specifically speaks about when it comes to after death. So some shepherds lead us toward trying to save ourselves, and it's from pain, it's from suffering, right? There's actually a philosophy that's being preached here in America, but it's being sold everywhere else as well, all across the world. And it's this idea that if you follow Jesus, that actually you won't have pain or as much pain. Especially if you give in the offering, especially if you sow some seeds of righteousness, then you'll really get there. And what will happen is if you pursue this, and if you pursue God, he's not going to bring bad things your way. Can you imagine trying to live that out? I mean, if you're really honest with your life in the last year, and if you feel like, hey, I've given genuine effort toward Jesus, did you have pain in your life? Actually, I'll tell you, if you really follow Jesus, you're going to have probably a little more pain than you would have beforehand, than just being a human being. Because that's just what happens. There's things going on behind the scenes that we can't even see. But that doesn't mean there's not joy. It just means there might be some other suffering that you wouldn't have encountered otherwise, right? So these things, some shepherds say, hey, save yourself from pain, suffering, despondent feelings, and eventually maybe even final judgment. So it's on your shoulders to try to save yourself from these things. And so these shepherds will tell us things like, you're good just the way you are. Or they say things like, you can do this, you got this. Or maybe something like this, trust your heart and go with your gut, which is the theme and plot line for every single Disney movie in the creation of the world. Okay, I mean, you go down the line, and I'm not despairing on Disney. I'm just saying it mirrors what we think as society when we think about us. And I've even thought about this a little bit. Like there are some people who tell you that you might go to I don't want to label anything, just say some guru who's going to help you become the best version of yourself, which is something that's being sold today, right? And they'll tell you that, and they'll say, hey, this is how you do that. And it's about how you look out for you. It's about self-care, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't take care of yourself. I think you should. I think you should take care of yourself. But if you're the main focus of everything that happens in your life, you live that out, what kind of kids are you going to produce? You know, have you ever been around somebody who all they do is talk about themselves? They just, and when you want to like share something in your life and you're like, hey, yeah, they're like, oh yeah, that's cool, but listen to this. And they're like one-upping you as you go, and they just continually talk about themselves the whole time. They're so inward focused. You spend your time focusing on yourself and self-care only, and that's the only thing you pursue. What's going to happen is you're going to be very lonely eventually. Because you live that out to the fullest, it's going to take you down pathways that will actually lead to your destruction, not to your good. It doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue self-care. It just means pursue it in light of the gospel is the best way to do that. Okay? And maybe some others, maybe they're like, hey, listen, we can't necessarily solve this ourselves, but here's what we'll do instead. We'll distract ourselves. So some other shepherds will lead us down this pathway of distract yourself from the reality of pain, suffering, despondent feelings, and final judgment. And so these shepherds will tell you things like, you only live once, right? They'll tell you things like, don't miss out. Don't miss out on this or that. So, you got to go to this because you'll miss out. They'll tell you things like, get yours while you can because you can't take it with you. How many times have you heard that at a funeral, right? You can't take it with you. They'll tell you things like they'll tell you to live for comfort. They'll tell you to live for the weekend. They'll tell you to live for yourself. But here's what Jesus says instead. Jesus says something completely different. What does he say? He says, I'm the only way to those things. Like, I'm the only way towards pain eventually being gone. I'm the only way for suffering to be alleviated at the end of the day. I'm the only way where you're going to find true happiness. Because reality is, like, I think about, if you were to follow some of those things down the road, some of those other philosophies, they're going to lead you to some green grass. They're going to lead you to some places where you're going to actually experience some good things for a while, but eventually they will leave you wanting more. But David says here, and what Jesus is saying is he calls himself the good shepherd. He's saying, listen, that if you follow me, you won't want for nothing. That everything you want in your life is wrapped up in me. It's wrapped up in following me. This is where you find it. So Jesus tells us something different. He says, I'm the only way. It's through me that you can find peace, even during seasons of joy. In the midst, you can find joy in the midst of suffering. You can find rest in the reality of despondency. You can find righteousness in the face of final judgment. That it is in Christ that we find our hope. Jesus says that no matter how much we try to ignore pain, suffering, despondency, and final judgment, there's still a reality. But furthermore, he says this, but through him, you'll never have to endure pain alone. What does he say? I'm with you, even to the end of the age. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. As you follow me as your good shepherd, I'll be right there with you. We find in Jesus, we find this especially in the Gospel of John, where he's with his friends and they're weeping because they lost a brother. And what does Jesus do? He weeps with them. If he does that on earth, how much more do you think he's doing that in heaven? He's doing it always with us. When you weep, when you have to So when you weep, he weeps with you. You'll never have to endure pain alone. Even in your suffering, even your suffering has purpose. We've talked about that the last few weeks in Romans chapter 8. Your identity isn't found in how you feel. It's found with our standing with God. That our standing with God is righteous because of his willingness to lay down his life for us on the cross. So let's look at the final parts of this psalm here as we have some concluding thoughts, okay? The first one is this. Look at verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So here's what we find. We find David specifically talking about the valley of shadow of death. So what he's saying here is this. He's saying the valley of the shadow of death is normative. It's a normal human experience. It's normal for you to encounter pain in your life. It's normal for you to have people say things to you that you don't even need to hear. That's not even true, but they say it to you anyways. Right? Some of those shepherds may be in your life that have told you you're worthless. Right? That's a valley of the shadow of death. That's a shepherd leading you towards destruction. The difference is that in Christ, even that valley itself, he'll lead us through that too. Okay, these valleys look completely different for each of us, but what we learn is that turning to ourself and our own strength. When you read the story of David, what you'll find is when he turned to himself and he thought about himself and he tried to do things on his own, it completely and utterly fails. And because he's the king of Israel, there are massive implications for not just himself, but his entire kingdom, the people of God that are still being, still feeling the ripple effects even when Jesus walks on the earth. Like that's how bad of things that David did that eventually harmed his people, right? But of course, for you, it may not be you yourself, right? Doing things on your own. It may not be that those implications might be as large, but it could have implications on your kids. It could have implications on your family. It could have implications on your church. Your own life itself, there are implications for these things when we try to do things on our own strength and by ourselves. It's only going to lead us to more difficulty. But what we see in David too is the normal human experience. David experiences stress. He experiences worry. He experiences depression. You see this all throughout the Psalms. He experiences even guilt, right, that we all experience as well. And just to name a few things that he experienced. As a kid, David was a little bitty kid. And he had a bunch of brothers, and so he was the youngest of all of them, right? And so here comes the prophet of Israel, Samuel, and Samuel's coming, and he says, "Listen, Jesse," which is David's dad. He says, "Jesse, listen. Here's the deal. I'm going to pick one of your kids is picked to be the next king." Can you imagine how cool that would be? Like, and I know we don't serve a monarchy, but what if somebody walked into your house and said, I think about Nathaniel and Emily are about to have Benjamin. They're like, "Hey, listen, we've heard from God that Benjamin is going to be the next president of the United States." That'd be pretty cool, right? I would invite my entire family there. It'd be a celebration, or I'm sure you guys would. Hopefully you'd invite me. I'd invite myself apparently, right? But we would all be there and we would celebrate the birth, right? His birth, right? We would do that. But here's the thing. So David, he gets all of his sons there. And Samuel starts going through them all, and it's not any of them. And Samuel's like, "Okay, hold up. Jesse, do you have any more sons? Because what God's telling me is not matching up with what I see here." And he goes, "Well, we have that other kid. He's watching the sheep. We didn't think it was him. So, we didn't call him in." And so they have to wait for them to go get David out into the field where he's watching sheep, of course. And he comes in, and of course, he's the king, and he's anointed and the whole thing. And because of that anointing and because he's picked as the next king, he becomes best friends actually with Jonathan, which is the son of the actual King Saul at the time. And Saul gets really jealous of David. So much so he actually, they're having a meal one time, sitting at a table, having a meal. And David's just sitting there minding his own business, and Saul takes a spear and throws it at him. Now, good thing Saul's not a very good aim because he misses. And of course, David at this point, what do you do? I don't know. I guess he runs, right? That's what I would do. And so it begins this part of his life where he is literally running as a fugitive from the law, but it's all unjust. He's done nothing other than just be who he is and be who God's called him to be. He becomes a fugitive. And during that time, he's homeless. There's all kinds of crazy stories. You got to spend some time going through 1 Kings, right? And 1 and 2 Samuel, and just read about David and his family's life. I just encourage you to even do that this week, just to kind of connect with the stuff that David had to deal with. And what you'll find is you'll go, wow, David had a lot of high moments, but he had way more valleys than I've experienced in my life. That poor guy, he had a lot of things happening against him. He had to wait patiently for God's plan in that time, 7 years he had to wait before the fulfillment of him being king. where he was on the run. As a leader, he faces unfair accusations at times. There was one time where him and his army, they were out doing war, and they come home, and their entire city has been pillaged, and all of their families have been taken away, as now becoming families of this other nation. And there's this intense mourning that happens amongst these men, and some of them get so angry they want to kill David, just in their grief. And David, in the midst of his own grief, has to navigate that as a leader. I mean, just incredible valleys. He faced and lost battles to temptation. He commits terrible sins. And because of that, he loses his son at childbirth. Some of his trusted friends betray him. His own son betrays him and steals the throne. This is David's life. Now, again, tons of hills and tons of valleys, but at the end of the day, this is the normal experience for David, and we see in him some little evidences that, hey, that's kind of my life too. I've got these valleys of sorrow, these valleys of difficulty. In Jesus, we see similar things, though. We see valleys as well. We see plenty of valleys, don't we? We see plenty of suffering. We see plenty of things happening in his life that are terrible, but here's the difference. The difference is that he conquered the giants that David could never slay. In Jesus, we find the reason we don't have to fear when facing the valleys, because he went through the valley of the shadow of death for us. We hear him say that he's not going to leave us or forsake us. We see him willing to weep with us when that is our only response. We feel him carry us in valleys when we are crushed under the weight of our own guilt. I mean, he is with us in every single circumstance because he's gone through that valley before us, and he's out ahead leading us through that. And he's not telling us that everything's going to be just okay. He's telling us, I'm going to solve this. I'm going to make everything right someday. But not only that, not only in these moments now that you're experiencing now, but also in your future. Look at the end. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Verse 6, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Not only is that when Jesus is my shepherd, it changes things for my life now, but also it changes my future as well. Let's look one more place, okay? Revelation chapter 21. I'll just read a few verses for us this morning. This is at the end. This is when Christ has come back. He's set foot on earth, and they're going to they're going to fulfill the plan. All of the culmination of history has ended, and now at this moment, Jesus is going to be on earth with his people forevermore. Verse 1 of chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. And behold, he who is seated at the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. So all of these things that you want for your future, right? The things that you desire for yourself, for your kids, for your family, for the world, for your city, whatever it is, all of these things, what we find is that our hope isn't set in trying to be better. Our hope is set in following the shepherd who's good. And he says, listen, I'm going to make all of this right. It may not be now, but it will be right in the future. I think about what when Bryant preached a few weeks ago, where the idea that there's no charges, he said, this is from Romans chapter 8, no charges will stick forever. That at every point, God will be justified, and he will justify his people. And the reality is that in all the charges, there will be no condemnation that will stick to us forever. It might for a while. There might be things coming your way that's going to feel like the world is ending. But understand that at the end of the world, our resurrected Savior wins. And we get to be a part of that. And that's where we find our hope, even in the midst of the valleys. And that's where we find our hope, even when we think about our future. And the cool thing is he invites us to be a part of it. So we're going to pray here in just a second. And what we're going to do at that point is we will actually take communion as a church family this morning. Because we look to that good shepherd, right, who laid down his life for the sheep. We're going to remember that this morning. Okay, and after I pray, Matt's going to come up and lead us in. He'll give you some directions and how we'll take part in that, and then we'll spend some time worshiping as well. Okay, why don't you stand with me as I pray? I'll go ahead and invite Matt and Brian up right now. If you're wondering maybe what your responses should be this morning, there are some ways on your connection card where you can respond. Maybe it's you want Jesus to be your shepherd this morning, and you're going, he's not my current shepherd. You can come on up, Matt. He's not my current shepherd, and I want him to be my shepherd, and there's ways for you to get connected to that. Maybe it's, hey, listen, I need other people speaking into my life while I go through those valleys. I know Jesus is there, but I know part of the truth of him being there is putting people around me. And that's how you can get connected to a gospel community. And we'd love to get you connected to that. There are responses you can make even now as you consider the cross and as you consider what Christ did for us on the cross, he laying his life down. And as you remember, may we be full of worship this week, following the Good Shepherd, spending time in his word, spending time with him. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your grace and mercy. We are grateful for the fact that we don't have a shepherd who doesn't know what's best. God, thank you for sending us Jesus, who guides us in the pathways of righteousness, not our own, but in his own. And God, therefore, this morning we lay our hope, we stake our hope in the righteousness of Christ, and we claim what your word says, that because of him, because of what he's done, our standing before you is holy. And God, that our standing before you not only will be holy now, but God, in the future, we will stand before your throne and we will worship. God, I pray as we continue in worship this morning, God, I pray you would do a work in our hearts to help us to remember you. And may, God, that have implications on our life. It's in your son's name we're able to pray. Amen.